There was a McLaren front row lockout in qualifying of the first Grand Prix of the year in Australia. Lando Norris clinching pole this morning for the season opening Australian Grand Prix ahead of teammate Oscar Piastri as McLaren fired a warning shot to their rivals in scorching hot conditions at Melbourne's Albert Park. World champion Max Verstappen came third in tense qualifying, while Mercedes' George Russell will keep Red Bull's four-time world champion company in the second row. And Lewis Hamilton will start in eighth on his Ferrari debut. And to talk more about this and look ahead to tomorrow, we are joined by F1 analyst Lufefe Mayekiso. Good evening from us, Lufefe. Thank you for joining us again on Sports Live.
Good evening, Tabiso, to you and your audience, and thank you for having me.
Any surprises or no surprises for you that the McLarens were quicker?
Well, I mean, we had a discussion this time last week, and I think we all agreed that McLaren looked like the early season favorites, but obviously, based on preseason testing, we couldn't conclude, but today I think they confirmed it.
How do you expect them to come out then tomorrow there? Do you expect to be a battle there, dash to the first corner between Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris?
Definitely. I mean, it's Oscar Piastri's home race in Melbourne. In fact, he was born maybe 8 kilometers from the racetrack. So he will be determined to win. He's only 0.08 of a second behind Lando Norris, who is quickest. So, I mean, there's not much in between them because he did a blinder in the third sector and went half a second quicker than the quickest time at the time in that sector. But Lando managed to overshadow him in that quali. And generally last season, Lando's had the measure of him in qualifying. But I do expect a strong fight because Lando Norris, according to most pundits, is the favorite to win the championship this year.
And according to Drive to Survive, is the #1 driver for McLaren. But Max Verstappen behind them, how will he look at his third place considering the struggles that he had in practice on Friday?
Well, I think he'll be pleasantly surprised that his car was that competitive. I mean, starting in the second row is not bad at all, especially apparently there's 90% of chance of rain. So I think that always levels things out and it gives him an advantage. If you look at his drive in Brazil last season, he's shown that he is quite a rain specialist there.
Yeah. And George Russell in Mercedes is the lead driver, of course, after the departure of Lewis Hamilton. Is it a surprise for you at how comfortably they've outperformed the Ferraris?
It's not a surprise. I mean, I did say last year that watch now that Mercedes immediately after Lewis leaves, they're going to start performing, and that's exactly what has happened. I mean, Mercedes right up there as well, although the gap to McLaren is still about 3 to 4 tenths. So maybe they were just good on this day. And Ferrari, to be fair, they were much closer to McLaren at the end of last season in Abu Dhabi and Qatar, the last 2 races. So it is a surprise where they are. So I think more than Mercedes improving, at this stage, it looks like Ferrari has regressed. With that said, though, in FP3, both Hamilton and Leclerc set purple sectors earlier in the session. So maybe it's a bit of inconsistency or they didn't get their setup right for quali, but I think there is pace there in the prancing horse.
Okay, but do you expect, though, it to take time for Lewis, especially to get familiar with the car? He's been saying ahead of this race that it's completely different to what obviously he's been driving over the past few years.
Naturally, with the transition, there's always that period where he needs to get accustomed to the team. I mean, Lewis, he was at McLaren before he was at Mercedes. So the transition from McLaren to Mercedes wasn't a big one because McLaren was obviously a Mercedes customer. And so the teams are based in England because McLaren is in Woking and Mercedes is in Brackley, right? But now he's had to move to Maranello in a new country. There's the language barrier. I mean, you can see he's learning to speak Italian, but he's not fluent yet. It's a totally new environment. So I think that does pose a bit of a new challenge for him. However, Lewis, this is, I think, his 17th year in Formula One. So I expect him to dial in at least by the Japanese Grand Prix, which is round 3 of the season at the very latest. Even tomorrow, though, with the rain coming as a 90% factor, I have to put him in as a possible podium finisher, if not race win.
And where would you put in Alex Albon and Yuki Tsunoda, considering the wet conditions also? Do they have an opportunity here to take advantage?
They do. I mean, they came in as a surprise for me. I think Sainz has looked the stronger of the Williams drivers through free practice and even in pre-season testing. So for Albon to respond like that and say, you know, this is my team, you're going to have to take this number 1 tag, because obviously at Williams, there's a dynamic there of 2 experienced, I'll call them middle-aged drivers. They're not literally middle-aged, but middle-aged for F1 drivers who are up and coming. And it looks like Williams are on an upward trajectory as well. So I think that now Albon is under pressure to perform, with Sainz coming into that team and getting off the blocks right away.
Okay, what time are we getting out of bed tomorrow to watch the race? What time does it start?
Starts at 6 a.m. because it's in Melbourne, Australia, obviously with the different time zones. So, yeah, I mean, as you can see in my background, I'm at home, so I'm going to be watching from here as well.
Okay, get some sleep also. Lufefe Mayekiso, thank you for joining us. Always a pleasure talking Formula One with you, and I'm sure we'll have more conversations throughout the season.
All right, thank you for having me, Tabiso, and have a good evening further, and your viewers are out there.
Okay, I thought he was going to call it at the end, who's going to win it, but let's leave it there. Let's not put the men on the spot. Looking forward to the first race of the year. The wait is finally over.